Imagine meeting a man who seems warm, spiritual, and welcoming. He smiles, plays guitar, talks about peace, and promises you freedom from a broken society. He feels like the leader you've been waiting for. But what if the same man slowly rewires your mind until you no longer think for yourself? What if he convinces you to kill, and you obey without hesitation? This isn't fiction. It's the terrifying true story of Charles Manson and how he brainwashed his followers into committing some of the most infamous murders in American history. Before we dive into the horrifying details, we must ask the question, how is brainwashing even possible? How could ordinary young people, some from good families, some with promising futures, suddenly give up everything, follow a short, scruffy ex-convict, and eventually kill innocent strangers at his command? To understand this, we must peel back the layers of dark psychology. We must explore how cult leaders exploit human weakness, twist emotions, and trap their followers in a mental prison. And Charles Manson, perhaps more than anyone in modern history, perfected these techniques. In this video, you'll discover the disturbing childhood that shaped Manson into a manipulator, the psychological tricks he used to recruit his family, the brainwashing methods that made his followers obey without question, and how this dark chapter of history still warns us about the dangers of mind control today. So let's begin. To understand how Charles Manson could even attract followers, we must step back into the late 1960s. America was in chaos. The Vietnam War was raging, civil rights protests filled the streets, and a new counterculture, drugs, free love, rebellion, was exploding among young people. Many young men and women felt lost. They distrusted the government, rejected their parents' values, and sought something deeper than materialistic suburban life. They wanted community, freedom, spiritual answers. Into this storm walked Charles Manson. At first glance, he didn't look like a threat. Barely 5 feet 6 inches, scruffy and often barefoot, Manson didn't resemble a powerful cult leader. But appearances deceive. What Manson did have was charisma. He could read people instantly, spot their insecurities, and mirror back exactly what they wanted to hear. He had mastered what psychologists call cold reading, the ability to make someone feel seen, understood, and special, even if you just met them. When vulnerable young people crossed paths with Manson, they felt like he got them in a way nobody else ever had. Manson's earliest recruits were mostly young women in California, drawn to him by his music, his magnetic personality, and his promises of freedom. He told them society was corrupt, that parents had lied, that love should be free, and that they were destined for a higher purpose. This is where the psychology of brainwashing begins. Offer people belonging, purpose, and meaning. Manson wasn't just giving them a place to stay. He was giving them an identity. Soon, he called them his family. And in a turbulent world, that family felt safer than anything else. Mason used his steps to control his followers. Step 1. Love bombing. One of Manson's earliest tactics was what psychologists call love bombing. When new recruits arrived, they were showered with attention, affection, and acceptance. Imagine being a lost, confused teenager, far from home. Suddenly, you're embraced, told you're beautiful, brilliant, and destined for greatness. You're part of something special. This overload of positivity floods a brain with dopamine and oxytocin, the bonding chemicals. You feel addicted to the group. You feel like you finally found home. But here's the catch. Once someone is hooked, the love bombing shifts into control. Step 2, isolation. Manson knew that to fully control his followers, he had to cut them off from outside influences. Slowly, he encouraged them to abandon their families, quit jobs, and move into communes, most famously, the Spawn Ranch outside Los Angeles. There, separated from society, they were immersed in Manson's world 24/7. Psychologists know isolation is one of the most powerful tools of brainwashing. Without external voices, the only perspective you hear is a leader's. And over time, his version of reality becomes the only reality. Step 3, repetition. Manson endlessly repeated his ideas through songs, conversations, late-night rants. He twisted biblical references, mixed in Beatles lyrics, and preached about an upcoming apocalypse he called Helter Skelter. Repetition is a fundamental tool of indoctrination. When ideas are heard over and over, especially in an emotionally charged environment, the brain begins to accept them as truth. And soon, Manson's followers believed the end of the world was coming, and that only they could survive it. At this point, Manson's followers weren't just a group of hippies. They were becoming soldiers of an ideology. They obeyed him not because he threatened them, but because they genuinely believed he was a prophet, a guide, a savior. And that's the chilling truth of brainwashing. The victim doesn't think they're being controlled. They think they're finally free. But how did Charles Manson, an ex-convict with no education, master the art of psychological manipulation so perfectly? To answer that, we must go back to his childhood, his prison years, and the dark experiences that molded him into one of history's most dangerous manipulators. To understand how Charles Manson brainwashed his followers, we must first look at the man behind manipulation. Because no one is born a cult leader. Manson wasn't destined to be a prophet of death. He was shaped, scarred, and twisted into one. Charles Manson was born in 1934 in Cincinnati, Ohio. His mother, Kathleen Maddox, was only 16 years old. She was unstable, drank heavily, and often disappeared for days at a time. Manson never knew his real father. His stepfathers drifted in and out of his life. From the very beginning, Charles grew up without stability, without love, and without trust. Psychologists know that childhood neglect and abandonment often create deep wounds. Wounds that can manifest as a desperate need for control later in life. For Manson, this became the seed of his future obsession. If he couldn't be loved, he would be obeyed. By age 9, Manson was already in trouble. He was stealing, skipping school, and lashing out. He was placed in reform schools where he was often beaten by older boys and abused by staff. Every time he was locked up, Charles learned one painful lesson. The world is cruel, and you survive by manipulating it. Rather than fight directly, Manson began to develop his natural ability to lie, charm, and exploit others. Even as a child, he could twist people's emotions to get what he wanted. Throughout his teens, Charles bounced between juvenile facilities. Each time, he tried to find acceptance, but was rejected. Each time, he promised to change, but didn't. By his early 20s, he was in and out of prison for theft, fraud, and pimping. But here's where it gets interesting. Manson didn't just survive prison. He studied it. He observed the way stronger inmates control weaker ones. He learned how predators manipulated victims. He watched carefully how power worked inside confined groups, and he began to refine his own skills. Most people think of prison as punishment. For Manson, it was a classroom. In prison, he devoured books on psychology, hypnotism, and religion. He learned how suggestion works, how people can be influenced with tone of voice, body language, and repetition. He also studied Scientology while behind bars, absorbing techniques about controlling minds and recruiting followers. Most chillingly, Manson read Dale Carnegie's classic, How to Win Friends and Influence People. But instead of using it for self-improvement, he twisted the lessons into tools of manipulation. Carnegie taught that to influence others, you must make people feel important, mirror their desires, use names and compliments often. Manson weaponized these techniques. When he got out of prison, he was ready to use them, not to inspire, but to control. By the time Charles Manson was released in 1967, he had spent over half his life in institutions. He entered the free world as a man with no real skills, no family, no money, but he had something more dangerous, a manipulative genius for reading people's vulnerabilities. Psychologists describe this as psychopathic charm. Unlike normal charm, which comes from genuine warmth, psychopathic charm is a mask. It's carefully designed to disarm, to attract, and to exploit. Manson knew how to lock eyes just long enough to make you feel connected. He knew how to tilt his head, lower his voice, and make you feel like you were the only person in the world who truly mattered. This is why people fell for him so quickly. It wasn't about his appearance. It was about how he made them feel. Manson was paroled in March 1967, right as the counterculture movement was exploding in San Francisco. The summer of love was just beginning. Thousands of young people were rebelling against society. They were turning to drugs, spiritual gurus, and communal living. It was a perfect stage for someone like Charles Manson. He was older than most of the young hippies. He had lived in institutions, so he understood group dynamics. He had studied manipulation, so he could instantly identify who was lonely, who was insecure, and who was searching for meaning. In short, the world was his hunting ground. Manson began hanging around the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco, a hub for hippies, musicians, and seekers. He played guitar on the streets. He told stories about cosmic truths. He spoke about love, peace, and freedom. But underneath his gentle tone, he was scanning people, looking for weaknesses. Young women, especially those estranged from their families, were his first targets. He flattered them, told them they were beautiful, told them society had lied to them. Within days, he could make someone believe she was special, chosen, destined. That was Manson's genius. He didn't recruit followers. He made people recruit themselves. It's important to realize Manson didn't see himself as ordinary. By now, he believed he was more than human. Years of rejection had turned into a twisted kind of narcissism. If society rejected him, then society was wrong. He began to see himself as a prophet, a teacher, even a messiah. This delusion, mixed with his manipulative abilities, created the perfect storm. He was a man who believed he had the right to control others and had the skills to actually do it. And so, with his release in 1967, Charles Manson stepped into the world as a broken man carrying dangerous knowledge. But soon he would find the lost and vulnerable souls who would become his disciples. How did he attract them so quickly? And what psychological traps did he set to keep them loyal to him at all costs? The answer lies in the story of recruitment and indoctrination, the dark techniques Manson used to transform ordinary young people into brainwashed followers. When Charles Manson was released from prison in 1967, he stepped into a world that was perfectly primed for his arrival. The counterculture movement was in full bloom. Thousands of young people were searching for freedom, for love, for something greater than themselves. And that's when Manson appeared. San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury district was a magnet for lost souls. Teens had run away from middle-class homes. College kids were dropping out, chasing spiritual experiences. Drugs were everywhere. Manson walked among them with a guitar and a message. You are beautiful. You are perfect. You don't need society's rules. You just need love. To a lonely runaway girl who had been ignored or rejected all her life, those words hit like lightning. Psychologists call this the love bombing technique. Overwhelming a target with affection, validation, and attention so they feel instantly connected. One of Manson's earliest recruits was Mary Brunner, a quiet librarian in Berkeley. He charmed her, convinced her to let him move into her apartment, and soon brought in other young women. By 1968, Manson had gathered a small group of followers, mostly women in their late teens and early 20s. They called him Charlie. They shared everything. They saw him as a wise teacher, someone who had the answers. But in truth, he was setting the stage for total control. Manson's recruitment process followed a clear pattern. 1. Isolation. He encouraged followers to leave their families, drop out of school, and cut ties with the outside world. Once isolated, they depended only on him. 2. Drugs. He used LSD and other psychedelics to break down defenses. But while everyone else tripped together, Manson often took smaller doses. That way, he could remain in control and guide their experiences. 3. Repetition. Manson repeated mantras about love, death, and the coming apocalypse. He drilled his philosophy into their minds until it became reality. 4. Sexual manipulation. He used sex as both reward and punishment, breaking down traditional bonds and making loyalty to him the only constant. These are classic cult techniques. Brainwashing 101. But what made Manson different from other hippie gurus was the darkness beneath his words. He wasn't just teaching peace and love. He was preparing his followers for war. By 1968, Manson and his followers relocated to Spawn Movie Ranch, a decaying film set on the outskirts of Los Angeles. The ranch was isolated, dusty, and far removed from the mainstream world. Psychologists know that isolation strengthens control. Cut off from society, followers stopped measuring themselves against outside norms. Instead, they look only to the group and to the leader for reality. At Spawn Ranch, Manson was the sun, the moon, the stars. He used his main techniques of domination. 1. Gaslighting. Manson constantly twisted reality. If someone doubted him, he accused them of weakness. If they questioned his teachings, he mocked them until they gave in. Over time, his followers stopped trusting their own thoughts. 2. Confession sessions. He encouraged followers to share their deepest fears and secrets. But these were later used as tools of control, blackmail hidden beneath spiritual guidance. 3. Dehumanization. He gave followers new names, stripping away their old identities. They became Squeaky, Tex, Sadie. The message was clear: your old self is dead. You are reborn in Charlie's world. 4. Alternating fear and love. Sometimes he was a gentle father figure. Other times, he was terrifying, violent, unpredictable. This emotional roller coaster created trauma bonds, a psychological trap where victims cling tighter to abusers in search of safety. By late 1968, Manson's family numbered over 30 people. Most were women, though a handful of men became key enforcers. They gave up everything: money, possessions, even their sense of self. In their minds, Charles Manson wasn't just a man. He was a prophet, maybe even Christ himself. And once he had this level of devotion, he introduced his most dangerous idea: the prophecy of Helter Skelter. In 1968, the Beatles released a White Album. To most people, it was just music. To Charles Manson, it was a prophecy. Manson claimed the Beatles were sending him secret messages through their songs. In his interpretation, Helter Skelter was about an impending race war in America. According to him, Black Americans would rise up and overthrow the white establishment. But because they were unprepared to rule, Manson and his family would emerge from hiding to lead the survivors. It was delusional. It was paranoid. But to his drugged and isolated followers, it sounded like destiny. Manson preached that his family must prepare for this coming apocalypse. He urged them to stockpile weapons, learn survival skills, and stay loyal to him above all else. But here's the psychological trap. He convinced them the outside world was doomed. He convinced them only he knew the truth. He convinced them they were chosen, special saviors of the future. This combination, fear of destruction plus promise of salvation, is one of the most powerful tools of mass brainwashing. By 1969, Manson was growing frustrated. The music industry hadn't accepted him as the rock star he believed he was. The race war hadn't started on its own, so he decided to spark it himself. And that's when the brainwashing reached its darkest point. In August 1969, Manson sent a group of his most loyal followers, including Charles Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, and Patricia Krenwinkel, into Los Angeles. Their mission: to commit brutal murders that would be blamed on black militants, triggering the race war Manson had predicted. On the night of August 8th, the group entered the home of actress Sharon Tate, who was 8 months pregnant. They slaughtered her and 4 others in one of the most infamous crimes in American history. The next night, they struck again, killing supermarket owner Leno LaBianca and his wife Rosemary. The murders were gruesome, ritualistic, and senseless. And yet, none of the killers resisted. They obeyed without hesitation. Why did they obey? Psychologists point to several factors. 1. Obedience to authority. Just like in the famous Milgram experiment, people will often obey orders, even to harm others, when a strong authority commands it. 2. Dehumanization of victims. Manson painted outsiders as pigs, not real humans. Once someone is dehumanized, killing them feels justified. 3. Groupthink. In the cult environment, questioning Manson meant risking exclusion or violence. No one wanted to be the outcast. For broken identity. After years of indoctrination, followers no longer saw themselves as individuals. They were extensions of Manson's will. The murders horrified the world. Within months, the family was arrested. The trial in 1970 became a media circus, with followers still loyal to Manson, carving X's into their foreheads to show unity. Even in prison, Manson maintained influence, attracting admirers who saw him as a dark messiah. But the spell was broken. Society finally saw through the illusion. Charles Manson never fired a gun. He never stabbed a victim. And yet, through words alone, through manipulation, through the weaponization of psychology, he controlled others so completely that they kill for him. That is the terrifying power of brainwashing. What can we learn? 1. Isolation breeds control. The more cut off you are from outside perspectives, the more vulnerable you are to manipulation. 2. Charisma can be a weapon. A charming leader is not always a good leader. Charisma can hide cruelty. 3. Fear plus hope equals control. When someone convinces you the world is doomed but they have the only solution, beware. 4. Anyone can be vulnerable. Manson's followers weren't evil. They were ordinary people caught in a psychological web. So the next time someone tries to win your devotion with love bombing, with promises of salvation, with visions of fear, remember the story of Charles Manson. Because dark psychology is not just history, it's a warning. And those who do not see the trap are destined to fall into it. Charles Manson's story is extreme. But the truth is, dark psychology is being used in far more subtle ways all around us. Don't be the next victim of manipulation. Subscribe now and turn on the bell so you never miss the strategies that can help you stay one step ahead.